You're listening to TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour with your host, the Director of Dixie Heritage, Dr. Ed DeVries.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Remember the Verizon guy? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Well, we've got a new one. Can you see me now? Can you see me now? Is this awesome or what? We've got a new angle here on the Dixie Heritage Hour. We always want to be on the cutting edge. And this is radio that you can watch. So we figured out that probably 95% of our listening audience was downloading the broadcast over the internet. There are some folks that listen to the radio, but most people are downloading on the internet, which means that all of our listeners, or at least 95% of our listeners, also have the potential to be viewers. So whenever possible, what we're going to start doing is we're going to have broadcasts that you can see. Of course, that's going to be determined by the guest on the show. And today's guest, Julie Hawkins, has FaceTime, and I have FaceTime. And so we're going to be able to see each other. And so rather than recording an audio interview over the telephone, what Julie and I did was we recorded a video interview over FaceTime. So you can hear the interview, you can watch the interview, and it'll be a little bit more interactive viewing experience for our listeners and our viewers. I'm going to date myself here, but when I think in junior high school, there was a hit song on the top 40, Video Killed the Radio Star, and so maybe we're going to do that, I don't know. But here in a minute, we're going to have an interview with Julie Hawkins. For those of you who don't know who Julie Hawkins is, she is the lead guitarist, the lead singer of the Julie Hawkins Band. She's also a Dixie Heritage subscriber. We've got some really neat people who subscribe to Dixie Heritage, and Julie is one of them. And in talking to Julie, I found out that not only does she have the band, but she's also the author of several books. She has written 4, soon to be 5, Confederate-themed War Between the States novels. She's also written a cowboy novel that took place in her hometown of Sioux City, Iowa, or Sioux Falls, Iowa, with one of those Sioux. And she's just a neat person to talk to. So we're going to talk to her here in a second. In fact, Julie lives out in Colorado. So for all you New Age folks out in Colorado who don't like the Confederate flag and who love Julie and the Julie Hawkins Band, hate to break it to you, but Julie is one of us. Yeehaw. Anyways, we're going to go to the interview with Julie Hawkins here in just a second. But before we do, let's just have about a 20-second commercial. Have our narrator, Gary, tell you about an awesome event that's coming up here in Central Florida, an event that I'm going to be attending. So if you're listening to this, you can make the event in Central Florida. Come on out, meet me.
God Bless America Again conference is coming to Ocala, Florida, January 26th and 27th. Starts at noon each day at the Southeast Livestock Pavilion, 2282 Northeast Jacksonville Road. It's going to be a time of prayer, praise, and testimony, and some of the best in Christian gospel music. Everyone's invited. Tickets, you don't need no ticket. It's a free event. Call 352-250-1771 for more information.
I've got J.D.R. Hawkins with me, author of several War Between the States books. J.D.R., what does J.D.R. stand for?
Those are my initials, Julia Dawn Ryan Hawkins.
Okay, so why 2 middle names?
I kept my maiden name.
Okay. And so you've written, well, before we get into the books, you're living in Colorado now?
Yes.
Are you from there originally?
I'm originally from Sioux City, Iowa.
Iowa, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Neither Colorado nor Iowa are southern territories.
No.
So, where did the southern sentiment come from?
Well, I guess when I took a trip out to Gettysburg, I'd never seen a Civil War battlefield before, and it just struck me as being so enormous and profound and, fascinating that I decided I wanted to write a book about it. But there have already been so many books written, especially from the northern perspective, like the Red Badge of Courage and, all the officers' stories and that kind of thing. I just wanted to write a book about a typical southern kid from a farm and his reason for enlisting. So that's what I did. I just randomly picked a place in Alabama that just happens to be called Ryan's Crossroads, and I thought, that's the sign.
Okay.
So, yeah, I chose him to be from that area, and just kind of, the story just kind of unfolded on its own. I did some research about the cavalry, because I wanted him to be a horseman, and I discovered some characters that I hadn't previously learned about, like Jeb Stuart. He's a very colorful cavalry commander, and he is a music lover and an animal lover, and I can relate to both of those because I'm a musician as well. And so I just decided that I would write this book, and the book became a series. Eventually I wrote a sequel, another sequel, and then I went back and wrote the prequel. So right now there are 4 books, 3 of which have been published.
So are you done with the 4th one, or is it still in the works?
I'm done with it. I'm probably going to publish it next fall. And it's got to be, I'm going to change the storyline a little bit and maybe bring in some aspects about the Confederate gold and that kind of thing.
Okay.
Because it takes place during Reconstruction, so yeah. The first book it starts at the very beginning of the war with President Jefferson Davis getting inaugurated in Montgomery, because that was the original capital for the Confederacy. It was Montgomery, Alabama. Then they moved it to Richmond later on. But that's where my story starts, and then it goes up through the end of the war. The 3 books do. The first 3 books.
So then, what will the fourth book do?
The 4th book is about Reconstruction, and the main character goes back down south, and he's expecting complete disaster. So it's kind of the whole carpetbagger aspect and that kind of thing.
So, will it be the last book in the series, or will you keep going after that?
I'm considering writing a 5th book in the series. The main character has always been wanting to come out west, and since I have a lot of years experience living here in Colorado, I thought, well, he should just come to Colorado and look for gold, and we'll see what happens then after that.
Well, I guess from Iowa to Colorado isn't too long of a distance. Of course, you've got Kansas in the middle, and Kansas is not a small state.
Yeah. And Nebraska.
So, will any of your personal journey westward make its way into the book?
Well, yeah, I always try to incorporate a little bit of personality and my own personal experiences. The main character is actually based on my oldest son and his best friend, and how they both, those guys are inseparable. They've been friends for, 20-some years. But anyway, I kind of based the main character and his best friend off of them. And then a little bit of me and a little bit of my dad.
Okay.
All incorporated into this main character. And so, yeah, I do that a lot when I write. I take past experiences and put them in there and stuff,
So how long ago was it when you wrote the first book?
Well, it's been a while. I think I started writing it in 2006, I want to say. It was published in 2007, and it was just republished with my new publisher this past spring.
So who is the publisher now?
My publisher is Foundations LLC. They're out of Mississippi.
Okay.
They're a small publisher, but they've grown enormously in the past year. So, yeah, I'm real happy to be with them.
So, obviously you started writing these books about 10 years before the proverbial, hit the fan regarding the Confederacy.
Yeah.
So, when that happened, and since then, have you found that that's helped your book sales, hurt your book sales?
I don't think it's affected the book sales so much. It's given me a lot of things to write about on my blog, though, about the statues. And my husband was transferred from Denver down to Memphis for several years. So we lived down south, and just in Mississippi, just south of Memphis. And Memphis just right before Christmas took down their Confederate statues, one of President Davis and one of Nathan Bedford Forrest. And they went against state law to do it because Tennessee passed the law. But I don't know, it's a big mess, and to me it's kind of heartbreaking because those statues are gorgeous pieces of works of art to me. You know, I know there's a lot of controversy surrounding them, but you can make controversy out of pretty much anything if you wanted to.
Right.
You know?
So, Colorado. I know that there's a certain aspect of people in Colorado that are, very much live and let live.
Yeah.
And there's another aspect of people out in Colorado that are very much new age, vegan.
Mm-hmm.
Describe how you will. And, Colorado is one of those states that you don't quite know whether it's going to go blue or red in any given election cycle. So when you meet people in Colorado, be they people you work with or people, you meet in wherever, different places you're at, moving around, and they find out that you're writing War Between the States books from a Confederate perspective and blogging in support of Confederate flags and monuments. Does that sit okay there, or does that give you a lot of grief, or is it a mixture? Or?
Well, I live in Colorado Springs, and it's basically a military town. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the guys are very open to it. They want to hear about both sides, and, they're not just, it wasn't cut and dry. It wasn't one side's wrong, one side's right. It was a lot of mixed up emotions, a lot of people in the North fighting for the South and vice versa. And it wasn't about slavery, they just want to make it all cut and dry these days. And it was a lot more complicated than that. So when I tell people about my books, I try to explain to them that I wanted to write the books to get, in the Southern perspective, to give people who aren't taught the Southern side what it was really about for the South, and how many sacrifices they had to make, and why they still have reenactments all the time.
Right.
And everything. It's a big deal down there. And living down there, I got to see it firsthand. I even, got involved with a UDC chapter, and we dressed out and we worked as Dossets in a little town called Holly Springs, Mississippi. And that was great fun. At first I was like, I'm not going to dress up in Civil War costumes. That's ridiculous. But the more I did it, the more fun it became. So, yeah. It was great.
So did you actually join the Daughters? Were you able to find a Confederate ancestor and join, or was it just a group that you hung out with?
Well, when we first moved down there, I had a book signing lined up, and we didn't know anybody. We went to this little museum in Hernando, Mississippi, and Miss Annie Ruth Brown was there, and she told us about some guys that we should contact, and they'd come to the book signing and they'd wear their Civil War costumes. And I thought, well, great, why not? So I gave them a call, and they showed up, and some of their wives showed up, and they were all dressed out in their, Confederate glory. And one thing led to another. They invited me to a meeting, and they made me a, what do they call it? Like not an honorary member, but
auxiliary
like
member?
A sole associate member.
Yeah.
So they couldn't find any Confederate ancestors in my family. Mm-hmm. Understandably, because my ancestors primarily Germans and Irish, and came over after the war. They were smart. They didn't come over before.
Right.
And but they did find a Confederate ancestor on my husband's side, so we thought that was pretty amusing.
Well,
you just never know.
Yeah. You know what's crazy as far as the Daughters are concerned is my wife probably has more proof of her Confederate ancestry than I do.
Oh.
Including letters.
Oh, wow.
A bunch of letters that were written by her ancestor that are still in her family.
Oh, that's
but
very
that
cool.
wasn't proof enough for her to be able to join.
Oh.
So.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah. When I joined the Sons of Confederate Veterans many years ago, I had done a lot of research, and I actually postponed joining because I was looking for, more documentation.
Uh-huh.
And then I actually come in to join, and I'd been attending meetings for I don't know how long, and I actually come in to join, and I have a stack of documentation. I give the genealogist this stack of papers, and he just hands it back to me. And he asks me, he says, what was your great-grandfather's name? I told him. He said, what unit was he in? I told him 19th Texas Infantry Company C.
Oh.
He types it into his little computer. He finds my ancestor in the database.
Yeah.
Clicks a few more things, stamps my little thing, and I'm a member. So, didn't double check anything, but the daughters sometimes can be pretty particular about their genealogy and stuff.
Yeah. But, it was kind of interesting. My husband didn't know that he had a Confederate ancestor, and it all came from my writing this book, and us moving down south. And then there was a genealogist in the SCV group that came to my book signing. And so they did all the research for him and found out his great-great-grandfather fought for the Confederacy, and his name was Hamilton Fish. Come to find out, he was a pretty famous guy in his day. He served as Secretary of State, I think it was, under Grant during his administration. And he was a senator and all this other stuff. It was pretty fascinating. And, you just don't know until you start researching and finding out.
So where was your husband from originally? Where'd he grow up?
Oh, Iowa.
Iowa? So he didn't grow up a Southern boy either then?
No, but he has relatives in Missouri. And then when I wrote the book, we decided we should go visit these battlefields just to make sure I was getting it right. Unfortunately, I had it imagined pretty accurately. But we went to the Chancellorsville battlefield, which is near Spotsylvania, and there's a whole bunch of them that are really close together right there. And we went and talked to the Park Service and found out, I had researched it and found out there was a farm involved in the center of this battle called the Hawkins Farm. And so we found out more about it, found out exactly where it was located. We went to see it. Now there's another house, a vacant house, standing on that exact spot. But we kind of wandered around, and there's a little church right next to it with all these Hawkins buried in there and stuff. And so we figured out that his side of the family left Virginia, went down to Missouri. Some stayed down there, and some went up to Iowa because they were farmers. And then some of them stayed in Virginia, so it kind of split up. It was like two brothers or something that kind of split apart.
So then those were his ancestors then that were there by the battlefield.
Yeah. That's
So
pretty interesting.
So would you say, I'll ask you, you can answer this question for yourself, and if you think you can even answer it for your husband as well.
Okay.
Growing up in Iowa, do you think that you were more of a Yankee as a little kid, or I mean, had you gone to a Civil War reenactment as a little girl, which side would you have cheered for? That's the best way to ask the question.
Oh, I don't know. I didn't know enough about it. I wasn't interested in history at all during high school or any of that. I developed an interest for the Victorian era, I guess, when we moved to Colorado, and I got, really intrigued with all the mining towns out here and things like that, and that whole era. And then when I got to go to Virginia, it sparked an interest in the Civil War. So, yeah, I don't think I could have chosen sides when I was a kid, though, really, because it wasn't, there aren't reenactments to speak of there, and there really not a lot of statues, they just don't talk about it much,
Right.
So, yeah.
So what about your husband when he found out he had Confederate ancestors and he was a Virginia boy? Well, how did that change his whole outlook on life?
Well, he thought it was pretty fascinating. He wasn't so sure that he should go around publicizing it at first. But then he decided, once I started going and dressing up with the ladies, he thought it might be fun. They talked him into walking a few parades and stuff, and then we went to some reenactments, and he borrowed some uniforms from some guys, and he became part of the artillery, and he loved shooting off the cannon. One reenactment we did was they have this ceremony every year at Ole Miss, and it's to honor the Mississippi Grays, which were college boys that enlisted at the start of the war. And by the end, there were maybe half a dozen left. There were hardly any left. But anyway, they were all buried on campus. And so every year, they go over there and they shoot off a cannon and have like a ceremony, a service to honor them, which is kind of cool. But they shut off the cannon and all the car alarms went off. I thought that was pretty funny. Those things are loud.
So, there in Colorado, are there any reenactments out there that y'all can get involved in, or something you've not had a chance to do since you moved?
Yeah, we've been in here in the Springs about a year, and I don't know of any to speak of here in the Springs, but, once I start getting more book signings lined up and stuff, I'm going to investigate that a little further. I haven't had a chance to do much with that aspect, with local type stuff. It's mostly been on the internet, things like that, because we moved twice since we've been here. So
right.
Now we're finally in a house and getting settled in. So
okay.
Yeah.
So have you hooked up with the United Daughters of the Confederacy out in Colorado, or is there a chapter out there by you, or haven't had a chance to look?
There is, and actually they contacted me back in June. One of my books won an award it's called the John Eston Cook Award for Fiction, and it's awarded by the Military Order of the Stars and Bars. And I don't know if you've heard of that organization.
I have. I'm a member.
Are you?
Yeah.
Okay. So
I'll tell you. I'll kind of insert this here. Talk about the genealogist at the United Daughters of the Confederacy. When I joined the MOS&B, I needed an officer ancestor.
Oh.
And I joined the SCV under an enlisted ancestor.
Okay.
And so I had found an officer ancestor, and he had been a chaplain in the Confederate Army.
Uh-huh.
But at the end of the war, he was captured, and he was taken prisoner. He was 97 years old when they took him prisoner of war.
Oh
if
my
you
God.
can imagine a 97-year-old chaplain in the Confederate Army traveling with one of the units.
Wow.
And all I can think is that the Yankees were embarrassed that they were imprisoning a 97-year-old Methodist pastor.
Yeah.
And so in his induction papers, when they were taking him into the prison camp, they put him down as a public works operative.
Okay.
Which basically means he was a spy.
Yeah.
In other words, they couldn't justify arresting a 97-year-old Methodist preacher, but they could justify arresting a spy.
That's
so they
terrible.
put him in as a spy, even though, there's no reason to believe that he was a spy, other than potentially the fact that he might have been wearing civilian clothing at the time of his arrest as opposed to a military uniform.
Uh-huh.
And so all of my paperwork for the Military Order of the Stars and Bars, they refused to acknowledge that he was a chaplain in the Confederate Army.
Oh.
And instead they have him listed as a public works operative.
Oh.
And so every time I talk to any of them, I say, so you'd rather take the word of some Yankee than... But that's... Anyways. But anyways, go on. Tell me about the John Eston Coke Award.
Well, my book, the third book in the series, won it last summer. A Rebel Among Us, it's called. And, yeah, so they had a little ceremony here in town at the library. And then... a couple of the commanders were members of the local SCV, so they said that they would contact my husband, and they did and everything, but we're still members down south, so we're going to probably stay with them for a little while longer before we transfer over, and then we'll start seeing what we can get involved with up around here, Okay. I'm a big fan of living history and teaching people the truth, and it's, there's so many misconceptions. It's kind of alarming in a way that people associate it with slavery. I mean, maybe 4% of the Southern population at the time of the war had slaves. A very, very small amount. And slavery was really being phased out at that time, and it probably would have come to a natural death if Lincoln hadn't, called for troops and started the war, essentially, because that's what happened. They blame the Confederates because they were the first to fire on Fort Sumter. But the reason they did that was because the Yankees overtook the fort. That's where they were storing all the cotton, and they wanted the cotton for themselves. So that's part of the story that a lot of people don't know either.
Yeah. We'll talk about slavery here in a minute and some other things with J.R.R. Hawkins. But first, a word from our sponsor, the Barnes Review. If you love listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, then I know that you'll love reading the Barnes Review. The Barnes Review is one of my favorite magazines. I began reading the Barnes Review long before they became a sponsor here on the program. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There's just not a more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So if you'll visit www.barnesreview.org, that's www.barnesreview.org, you can find out how you too can become a subscriber to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review by mail, or you can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review electronically in PDF editions. Or you can subscribe to receive both. That's what I do. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review. Does slavery, does it ever come up as a subject in your book, or not at all? Or?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. I have characters in the book who are slaves, ex-slaves. It's all part of it, And it was an issue. It's not to say that it wasn't. It was certainly an issue. It wasn't the main issue, though. I think the main issue of the war, or the cause of it, was economics. Because Western expansion was part of it, too. And just, I don't know, there were a lot of things that went into play. So, I don't know. It's interesting.
So when you're writing the book, I realize you're telling the story, and it's a fictional story, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you're kind of telling the fictional story of somebody who could very well have been involved in the war, and I'm sure the story you're telling is probably similar to any of a number of people's stories that have not been told.
Yeah.
And so do you focus more on the story and the person and the personal experience, and a lot less on the causes and the politics, or is it kind of a combination of the two, or how does that balance out?
I try to incorporate it all. At the beginning, when the main character's name's David Summers, when he enlists, he's just a kid, really. He just turned 18, and he's never been off the farm to speak of, and here he goes marching up to Virginia, and he doesn't understand any of it, really. All he's doing is fighting because his father was killed and getting revenge. That's his main reason to go, and find some adventure, But as far as the whole causes of the war, it becomes a big controversy, and a lot of different sides enter into it. And he gets influenced by a lot of the soldiers around him, as well as the other people he comes in contact with.
So is your character somebody who wants to be fighting, does not want to be fighting?
At first he wants to, but once he gets involved more, after the Battle of Chancellorsville, he is thinking, I don't know what was I thinking? Why did I do that? But then he's kind of locked in because he can't leave. The home guard come and get him, and he's just got to endure it and hope his horse lasts. During the war, Confederate soldiers had to provide their own horses, and they typically only lived about 6 months. So once the horse died, if they couldn't come up with another mount, they were in the infantry. So, yeah.
So is he somebody who maintains a Confederate loyalty and sympathy, or is he somebody who starts to kind of question that as the war goes on?
Well, he questions it, but he's still loyal to his homeland, And, he doesn't necessarily agree with slavery. When he's a younger kid, he goes to a slave auction with his best friend and his friend's father, and it revolts him, essentially. But he's like a victim of the times. He knows there's not much he can do about that. It's just their peculiar institution, they called it,
Right.
So, he doesn't agree with it. His family doesn't own slaves. His best friend's family owned 2 slaves. And, as far as anybody else in the county, there are a few people here and there, but for the most part, they don't own slaves.
So then, as you're writing all these things, has there ever been any time, be it from a publisher, be it from a family member, be it from yourself, be it from any group, has there ever been any pressure to try to make things politically correct, or have you pretty much been free to just run with things as you've wanted to? Or
Yeah, I haven't heard any disagreement about it because all of my stuff is based on research, and and that's really the truth of it, is how people felt during that time. Some of them were just in I don't know, just crazy, loyal to the South and the vice versa, and just there were so many confusing, mixed up factors, and at the same time there were Indian wars going on out west, and just a really, really crazy time in our history. But no, I've had compliments. In fact, a lot of people have told me, wow, I didn't know that, that's really interesting, and things like that.
So then no real post-publication problems either then?
No, not at all.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Here in a second, I'm going to ask Julie about her political blog, but before we do that, a word from another one of our sponsors, the American Free Press. If you're like me, and I'll bet you are because you're listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. You like to hear about the latest financial trends and to know what's happening around the world and right here in the United States, the things that can directly impact you, your life, and the life of your family. And if you're like me, you do not rely on the mainstream media to obtain this information because, frankly, you know that you just can't trust them. Fortunately, there is an alternative news outlet with a long-established track record for honesty and integrity, and that is the American Free Press. AFP is the preeminent alternative independent news source for honest, hard-working, truth-loving Americans. AFP is the antithesis of the controlled, lamestream media. AFP is employee-owned and has been so since its founding. Because of that, AFP never has and never will allow advertisers or special interests or big money to dictate what appears in the pages of the American Free Press newspaper. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. AFP covers the stories and tells the truth that the lamestream media is frankly scared to touch. And AFP offers real, on-the-scene reporting and commentary, the likes of which you will never see in the Washington Post, the New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, or just about any other lamestream news source that you can think of. That's right, there's only one national populist news weekly staffed by an unsurpassed team of veteran investigative journalists who will dare to rip the veil off of many of the major news stories that are being censored and suppressed by the big money controlled media monopoly. And that's the American Free Press. AFP publishes exciting, in-depth, uncensored news and information that's grassroots and patriotic, information that Americans need to know in order to combat the growing police state. AFP stands firmly against the New World Order and against those who are working to establish a global plantation under the rule of a powerful few. In short, AFP is your voice. If you have any doubt why they want to silence AFP, you must be relying on the lamestream media for your news, and folks, that's a big mistake. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today. So tell me a little bit about your blog. I've read a little bit of it. I remember I read it the other day when the Memphis statue of Forrest came down.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because the day that happened, and I do not know if his interview will air before or after yours, but I interviewed Al Arnold.
Okay.
And he's an author in Mississippi. He's a black gentleman.
Okay.
Wrote about his great-great-grandfather, who had been one of Nathan Bedford Forrest's slaves.
Uh-huh.
And he was very strongly opposed to Forrest's statue coming down.
Yeah, that's understandable. His slaves loved him. They fought for him. Mm-hmm. They were a special unit under Forrest. Yep. And that's something a lot of people don't know about General Forrest either. After the war, he did a lot to try and, bring the two races together and form equality. And there's this misconception, another one, that he started the KKK, which is completely false. There were 5 gentlemen in Tennessee who started it, ex-Confederates. Right. They started it. They tried to rope Forrest into it. Forrest was like, oh, whatever, and then once it got to be, because at that time, the KKK originally started as like a safeguard, because all of a sudden, all these slaves are free. They're homeless. They don't have anywhere to go. They don't have any food, so they're stealing from the locals and everything. So it was their natural way of defending themselves from being, overrun by these ex-slaves. And it was a real problem. I mean, sure, you can release all these people, but then what do you do with them? They end up in slums or something. It wasn't thought through at all. And so that's how it started. But then it got to be the lynchings and the violence. And that's when Nathan Bedford Forrest stepped up and said, you need to disband this because it's out of control.
But tell me a little bit about your blog. How did you get started with the blogging, and tell me some of the things that you're blogging about?
Well, originally I started a blog on Tumblr way back when, and I just wanted to talk about my books, mostly my writing process, things like that. And, as time went by, I wrote more books, and I include excerpts to the books, and held contests, things like that. And then all this controversy came up, so that gave me a lot more stuff to write about. And I didn't really intend to be politically involved with it all, but it just I don't know. People have so many misconceptions about the battle flag, and all this stuff. It's just, to me, it's just kind of ridiculous. It's like you're showing your ignorance when you think you're offended by this stuff because you don't understand it, And I've heard this argument before that they put up all the statues during the Jim Crow era to assert white supremacy or something.
Right.
I think that's ridiculous. I don't agree with that at all. I think they put him up when they had the money, because the South was super poor for decades after the war, and they put it up in honor of their ancestors. The UDC did a lot of that stuff. So, I don't know. Anyway, that's pretty much what I write about.
Well, I know that as an author of fiction books, it would probably be easier to avoid the political commentary. And it would probably even be better for book sales to some degree to avoid the political commentary, because there are probably some folks, maybe we'll call them Yankees, who would still buy a fiction book about a young Southern boy that was based in the Civil War period. So was there something in particular that made you just decide to throw caution to the wind and make the jump?
Well, I'm a history buff, and to me, it's destroying history, and sorry if you're offended, but there's a historical significance to all those statues, all the ones in New Orleans that were taken down and stuff. Once you get rid of that stuff, history has a tendency to repeat itself, and it's just, if nothing else, it's a good reminder of our past and our mistakes.
Right.
Yeah, so, and I'm a big horse lover. I've written a nonfiction book about Civil War, Confederate war horses as well. It's called Horses in Gray.
Okay.
And a lot of the horses that are discussed in that book have equestrian statues, with their owners, and now they're taking them all down. It's like, They won't understand, it's how do people even learn about the horses if they can't learn about the generals who own these or the people who own them?
Right.
And all these reminders of it are gone. And what do they do with those statues? To me, they're works of art, like I said. So that kind of disturbs me. And, if it offends some people, it offends some people. I'm willing to have a discussion about it,
So have you been to Lexington, Virginia? Have you been to the College of William and Lee? The College of Washington and Lee? There where General Lee was president of the college after the war. But not only is he interred in the chapel, but his horse Traveler is interred in the chapel as well.
Yeah. I haven't actually been there, but I've communicated with the Chapel Museum, and they're one of my acknowledgments in the book. They were very helpful with leading me to the right direction and informing me more about Traveler. And so, yeah, it was a lot of fun researching those horses, and just Traveler, of course, being the most famous Confederate war horse. But yeah, there are a lot of lesser known animals that were involved. There was a Mississippi unit that had a camel. And
I had read somewhere that Jefferson Davis, when he was the Secretary of the Defense of the United States before the war, that he had made a trip to Egypt and had procured camels and had attempted to start a camel regiment in the United States Army.
That's exactly right. He did. He's responsible for that. And he thought they would be very versatile in the Southwest because, it's arid and they didn't need a lot of water. And so that's why he started it. And then it kind of fizzled out, especially when the war started. And these camels went to different places. But one of them ended up in Mississippi. And then, it's kind of funny because years and years later, I think up through the 30s or something, they could see camels roaming around in the desert down there. With these, descendants of these camels. So who knows whatever happened to them. But yeah, it's pretty interesting.
I know you say you're a horse lover. Have you ever been around a camel?
Not close up.
Well, I used to joke with people. When I was the pastor of a Southern Baptist church, I used to joke with people that a camel is a horse that was assembled by a Southern Baptist committee. But when I was in Egypt myself, got to spend a little bit of time around camels. And, I could see where someone would be fascinated with horses. It would be very hard to become fascinated with camels. They're very nasty animals.
Yeah, I've heard they're stubborn and they spit, and then they found out too that they weren't very compatible with horses. The horses got spooked by them and stuff. So,
So, tell me, how does someone who's listening right now, how do they find your blog on the internet?
It's on my website, jdrhawkins.com. The blog's there. All my books are there. I have a couple of book trailers on there as well. Free to contact me. My email address is on there. And yeah, sign up for my newsletter.
Okay. So that's the one-stop shop then, jdrhawkins.com. They get your books, your blog, everything.
Yeah.
Very good. And I guess you answer the emails personally that come to the website, or does somebody else do that for you?
No, I do them all. Yeah.
Okay. So what are you doing when you're not writing books and hanging out with the United Daughters of the Confederacy and writing on your blog?
Well, I'm a musician, so I do a singer-songwriter thing, and I work at the Colorado College here in town. And my husband's studying to become a realtor, so we're kind of getting involved with that. Right now, the housing market in Colorado is booming, so we're pretty excited about that. Yeah.
So does the music ever take on a period theme? Or
Well, I did write one Civil War song, and actually it's on iTunes, so people can find it under my name, Julie Hawkins. It should be under there. It's called Gray is the Rose, and it is about a young Confederate widow, so it's kind of a tearjerker.
After the interview, Julie sent me the MP3 of Gray is the Confederate Rose, and so we're going to go ahead and we're going to insert that here so that our listeners can get a chance to hear this great song.
Once flaming red, I recall those last final words that you said. How you'd come home to me once the cruel war was won. We placed garlands and roses on our brave heroic son, but the grave that was cast and your blood it was spilled. Red like roses flowing, now sorrow has filled all my days with sad longing, thinking what should have been. We were vowed to be married, I cannot love again. Gray is the rose that was once crimson bright, that I placed by your grave when you came from the fight. My tears fall like raindrops, for I'll never see my true love, my darling, restored back to me. The roses are gray like the coat that you wore so proudly that day when you marched off to war, like the countryside is now lifeless and gray. So is my heart, my darling, bleeding for you each day. Gray is the rose that one time was scarlet. Tell me that over time I will forget. The pain will subside, the memory fade, like the red on the roses that to you I gave.
So it's the Julie Hawkins Band, and we've got a CD available on iTunes too. But that's more contemporary rock type stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, got a few more projects in the works, and I've written a book too about my hometown in Sioux City. Takes place during the Depression, and it's loosely based on my great aunt and uncle who ran a hotel downtown, and supposedly there was a lot of gangster activity going on, and Al Capone was there and all this, because during that time period, Sioux City was known as Little Chicago because it was a big stockyards town, but there was a lot of gangster activity and a lot of, oh gosh, a lot of anti-prohibition sentiment, I guess. You know, people didn't want to give up their booze. So there are a lot of interesting stories about my hometown in that time era too. So yeah.
So you were from more the western town part of Iowa than the agricultural cornfield part of Iowa.
Yeah, I'm from Sioux City, and that's right on the bluffs, so right on the Missouri River.
So then, was there ever a fascination with the cowboy era and the go west young man and all that, or?
Yeah, to some extent, I had been out to Colorado numerous times with my family, and my husband had too, and we met at school at Iowa State, got married, we moved up to Minnesota for a while and came back to Iowa, and then we decided, we both love Colorado, let's just take the plunge. So we did. When our little first son was only 2, we moved out here, and we've been here pretty much ever since, give or take. He got transferred down to Mississippi for a while, or Memphis, and then he got transferred up to Sioux Falls for the past 3 years. But for the most part, we lived here in Colorado and really loved it. So, yeah, the whole being in the West really kind of inspires you. There's a pro rodeo hall of fame here in town, and the stock show is going on in Denver right now, so there's a lot of Western cowboy influence here.
Mm-hmm. So, Colorado Springs, I know I've been there. It seems like, if my memory serves, it was probably about a 35, 40-minute drive from Denver.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate.
And
the south of Denver.
I know when I was in Colorado, the times I've been there, the few times, my personal opinion is that Colorado really starts at Denver. Everything east of there is really just like eastern Kansas.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty flat, and it's plains. Yeah. But then once you get to Denver, you see the mountains and everything changes.
The last time I was there, I flew into Denver, and I rented a car at the airport, and I had to preach at the First Baptist Church of Evergreen.
Okay.
And the car that they gave me was a PT Cruiser.
Oh.
And it was great getting out of town, but I remember when I hit the mountain, I didn't think I was going to make it.
Couldn't get up the,
No.
Yeah.
I had that thing. I had my foot all the way down on the gas pedal, and I'm going like 35, inching my way up the mountain. I didn't think I was going to make it.
Yeah, I know. That wasn't... They should have given you something with a little more power if they knew you were going to Evergreen.
Yeah.
So whatever.
So has there been a big call for books 4 and 5?
I have fans who are anxious to read the next one. I've, gotten emails from people who really like the first 3. And, most of those books are award winners too, so I'm proud to say.
Okay.
So yeah, they really love the story, they love the characters, and I've gotten pretty good reviews. And
so let me ask you this, because I should ask you this at the beginning. How did you become a Dixie Heritage subscriber?
Dixie Heritage? Gosh, I don't even know. I think a friend of mine referred me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how long have you been getting the newsletter now?
Oh, quite a while. A few years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were one of the early subscribers then?
Yeah.
Okay.
From the start, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you read the newsletter and still want to talk to me. So.
Well, yeah, and every once in a while I'll borrow some articles and put them on my blog too.
Okay.
'Cause, I think it's really informative, and like I said, a lot of people don't get to hear the Southern perspective unless they get it from a place like that. So I think it's good. I mean, people need to be informed. People need to know all sides before they make decisions, I think, not just jump to conclusions and assume that something is one thing when it's really not.
Right.
It's a number of things. So, yeah.
Well, I definitely appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Oh, happy to. And again, just thank you, and we'll make sure that everybody knows how to get a hold of your books. Are your books available as ebooks, say on Kindle or?
Yeah.
Okay, so they can order them that way as well.
Yep, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, pretty much anywhere on the net. Anywhere you can order them through brick and mortar stores. You can go into a Barnes and Noble and say, I'm looking for this book, and they'll order them for you or whatever, and plus you can get them on my website. The novels are available on Foundation's website, and the Horses in Gray book is published by Pelican Publishing.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, Pelican puts out a lot of good pro-Southern books.
yeah, I think my book is only available in paperback, though I don't think Pelican has it available in ebook format.
Okay.
But the novels are. So.
Okay, very good. Well, I appreciate you chatting with me, and hopefully we'll stay in touch by email.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, God bless.
Thank you so much.
All
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, that was my interview with Julie Hawkins from the Julie Hawkins Band and the author of several Confederate-themed novels. And Julie really is a neat person to talk to, and I hope you enjoyed the interview. I know I enjoy getting to talk with Julie, getting to know her a little bit, and getting to find out about all the things that she's doing. One thing I'd like to encourage you to do before I leave the broadcast today is this book right here, A Symbol of Hate, or An Ensign of the Christian Faith, The Truth About the Confederate Battle Flag. This is one of my best-selling books. It's available on Amazon. I want to give you a copy absolutely free. All you have to do, we talked about the Dixie Heritage newsletter during the broadcast. All you have to do is go to the website www.dixieheritage.net, www.dixieheritage.net, and I'll give you a copy of this book absolutely free. All you have to do is give me your email address, and I'll send it to you in PDF form. You say, Ed, why are you giving away a best-selling book? When people are buying it every day, why are you giving it away? Because our heritage has come under attack like it never has before. And I want to give you this book in the name of my ancestors whose good names are being besmirched and attacked every day by certain people on the political left. So go to the Dixie Heritage website, give me your email address. I promise I won't ask you for your credit card, won't ask you for your phone number, don't even ask you for your name. All you have to do is give me your email address, and I'll send you a PDF copy of this book. You can read it on your Kindle, you can read it on your iPhone or your Android phone, read it on your computer, read it on your tablet, whatever's most convenient for you. And also, when I send you that PDF file, what I'll also do is I'll sign you up to be a free recipient of the Dixie Heritage newsletter. And every Friday, you'll get that great newsletter in your email box, and it'll just be chock full of all kinds of information on Southern heritage and what's going on around America. Still have just a couple of minutes left on the broadcast, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave you with some music from Julie Hawkins and the Julie Hawkins Band. It'll play out until the end of the hour. I want to thank you for listening to this week's edition of TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour, brought to you by the Barnes Review. Next week, you can come back to the same website or the same radio station, wherever it is that you heard this broadcast or wherever it is that you downloaded it from. Come back again next week, and we'll be here again. Until then, God bless.
This is the calm before the storm arrives. This is the dark before the dawn, the new sunrise. You'll wonder how I could ever change this way. You'll soon discover it's a brand new day. There's a red sun rising. New awakening has come. It's time for revelation. Rising up like the burning sun. I have a new life and I have a new arrival. The moment's here for my aching soul's revival. You are an obstacle that's obstructing